The
Stop
morning
now!
sun
She's
rose
not
slowly over
dead!
Philadelphia.
Back
Golden
up,
light
all
spilled
of
across the
you!
city like honey poured from heaven. It touched the old brick buildings of Center City. It warmed the cobblestone streets of Society Hill. It danced upon the surface of the Schuylkill River. But at Oakmont Cemetery, the light felt different, colder somehow, heavier, as if even the sun knew that something was terribly wrong in this place today. The cemetery sprawled across 30 acres of manicured hillside in the western suburbs. Ancient oak trees lined the winding paths. Granite monuments stood like silent soldiers guarding the dead. And at the top of the highest hill, beneath a canopy of white silk that billowed softly in the spring breeze, a funeral was about to begin. Not just any funeral. This was the funeral of Victoria Blackwell. The name meant something in Pennsylvania. It meant power. It meant wealth. It meant a technology empire that employed 12,000 people across 3 states. Meridian Tech Industries had started in Victoria's father's garage 40 years ago. Now it occupied a gleaming tower in downtown Philadelphia. Its products sat in homes across America. Its stock traded on the New York Exchange. And Victoria Blackwell had built it all. She had taken her father's small software company and transformed it into something extraordinary. She had survived the dot-com crash. She had weathered the recession. She had outmaneuvered competitors twice her size and 3 times her age. At 52 years old, Victoria Blackwell was worth $4.7 billion. But none of that mattered now. Now she lay in a casket made of polished mahogany with gold-plated handles. Now she rested on white satin cushions, her hands folded peacefully across her chest. Now she wore the navy blue Chanel suit she had bought in Paris last spring, the one she said made her feel like she could conquer the world. Now she was dead, or so everyone believed. The mourners arrived in a procession of black limousines. They came from the highest circles of Philadelphia society, bank presidents and hospital board members, politicians and philanthropists, tech executives who had once been Victoria's rivals and had learned painfully to become her allies instead. They wore black from head to toe. The women dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. The men stood with their hands clasped in front of them, their faces arranged in expressions of solemn grief. But not everyone who came to mourn Victoria Blackwell actually mourned her. Some had come because it was expected. Some had come to be seen. Some had come because they wanted to make sure she was really gone. And one man had come to bury her alive. Marcus Blackwell stood at the head of the casket. He was 55 years old, tall and distinguished, with silver hair swept back from a handsome face that showed all the right signs of grief. His eyes were red-rimmed. His jaw trembled slightly. He clutched a white handkerchief in his right hand, and every few minutes he would lift it to dab at tears that seemed to flow without end. He looked like a man whose world had shattered. He looked like a husband who had lost the love of his life. He looked exactly the way he wanted to look. Because Marcus Blackwell was many things. He was charming. He was educated. He was the kind of man who knew which wine to order and which fork to use, and exactly how to make a woman feel like she was the only person in the room. But above all else, Marcus Blackwell was a liar. He had married Victoria 12 years ago when she was already wealthy and he was merely comfortable. He had smiled at the altar and promised to love her in sickness and in health. He had moved into her mansion and driven her cars and spent her money on tailored suits and golf club memberships. And for 12 years he had waited for his moment, waited for his chance, waited for Victoria to die so that everything she had built would finally belong to him. But Victoria was stubborn. Victoria was healthy. Victoria showed no signs of slowing down or stepping aside or doing Marcus the courtesy of having a convenient heart attack. So Marcus had decided to help things along. Dr. Graham Whitfield stood 3 feet to Marcus's left. He was 61 years old with a round face and wire-rimmed glasses and the soft hands of a man who had spent his career in examination rooms rather than operating theaters. He had been Victoria's personal physician for 15 years. She had trusted him with her health, her secrets, her fears about growing older. She had also trusted him with her life. That had been a mistake. Graham Whitfield owed everything to Victoria Blackwell. When his small practice had nearly gone bankrupt, she had invested enough money to save it. When he had wanted to open a specialty clinic, she had bought the building. When his son had needed treatment at an expensive rehabilitation facility, she had paid the bills without being asked. Victoria had lifted Graham Whitfield out of mediocrity and given him a life of comfort and respect. And Graham Whitfield had repaid her by signing her death certificate while she was still breathing. He stood now with his stethoscope tucked into the pocket of his black jacket, his face pale and sweating despite the cool morning air. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes darted from side to side like a trapped animal looking for escape. He was terrified, not of being caught. The plan had been perfect. The drug was untraceable. The symptoms mimicked natural heart failure. In a few minutes, Victoria would be lowered into the ground, and the concrete that had already been poured into the grave would seal her away forever. No, Graham Whitfield was terrified of something else entirely. He was terrified of the man standing at the back of the crowd. The man in the worn blue uniform with the cemetery logo on the chest. The man with the overgrown beard and the hollow cheeks and the eyes that burned with something that looked almost like madness. Graham had noticed him 10 minutes ago. He had watched the man push through the outer edges of the crowd, getting closer and closer to the canopy where the casket rested. He had seen the way the man stared at the coffin, at Victoria's peaceful face, at Marcus dabbing his eyes with that ridiculous handkerchief. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Pastor David Morrison opened his Bible. He was a tall man with a deep voice, the kind of voice that filled sanctuaries and commanded attention. He had known Victoria for 20 years. He had baptized her nieces and nephews. He had counseled her through difficult times. He had always admired her strength, her determination, her unwillingness to let anything stand in her way. Now he was going to commit her body to the earth. The pastor cleared his throat. The crowd fell silent. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to stop their singing. We are gathered here today, Pastor Morrison began, to celebrate the life of Victoria Ann Blackwell, a wife, a leader, a woman who touched countless lives with her generosity and her vision. Marcus dabbed at his eyes again. Graham Whitfield swallowed hard, and at the back of the crowd, the man in the blue uniform took another step forward. Victoria was taken from us too soon, the pastor continued. At 52 years of age, she had so much left to give, so much left to accomplish. But the Lord works in mysterious ways, and we must trust that He has called her home, but for a reason. The two cemetery workers moved closer to the casket. In a few moments, they would lift it from the platform and lower it into the grave. The concrete would hold it in place. The dirt would cover it completely, and Victoria Blackwell would be buried alive. Pastor Morrison raised his hand to offer the final blessing. Let us pray, he said. Heavenly Father, we commit the body of your servant, Victoria, to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to, a voice shattered the silence like a gunshot. Stop! Every head turned at once. Don't bury her. The man in the blue uniform was pushing through the crowd now, shoving past mourners who stumbled backward in shock. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were blazing. His voice was hoarse, but it carried across the entire hillside like thunder rolling down from the mountains. She's not dead. Do you hear me? She is not dead. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The scene had frozen like a photograph. The pastor stood with his hands still raised. The cemetery workers stood with their hands on the casket. The mourners stood with their mouths hanging open, too stunned to react. And then chaos erupted. Who is that man? Is he insane? Someone call security. Get him away from here. Marcus Blackwell's face had gone pale, not with grief this time, with something else entirely. His eyes had widened. His jaw had tightened. The hand holding the handkerchief had clenched into a fist. Security, he shouted. Get this lunatic out of here. 2 guards in dark suits rushed forward, reaching for the man in the blue uniform. But he was faster than he looked. He ducked under their grasping hands. He spun away from their clutching fingers. He moved with a speed and agility that seemed impossible for someone so thin, so weathered, so clearly beaten down by life. And then he was standing at the edge of the platform where the casket rested. He was standing directly in front of Marcus Blackwell. My name, he said, his chest heaving, his voice ragged but clear, is Nathan Mercer. I work here. I'm the night watchman for this cemetery. And I am telling you right now, in front of God and all these witnesses, that the woman in that casket is still alive. A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the crowd. Phones appeared in dozens of hands. Cameras began recording. Whatever was happening here, it was going to be seen by the world. Marcus stepped forward, and his face contorted with outrage. This is absurd. This is an insult to my wife's memory. I demand that you remove this man immediately. She's not a memory, Nathan shouted back. She's a woman, a living, breathing woman, and if you put her in that ground, you will be murdering her. You're insane, Marcus spat. You're clearly mentally ill. Guards, take him away, now. The guards moved forward again more cautiously this time. Nathan held his ground. He did not flinch. He did not back away. He stood like a man who had nothing left to lose. I heard you, Nathan said. Marcus froze. Last night, in the back parking lot, you were in your black Mercedes with the doctor. You didn't see me in the shadows. You didn't know anyone was listening. The color drained from Marcus's face like water running out of a sink. I heard every word, Nathan continued. You said the drug worked. You said she was cold. You said to bury her early before anyone could suspect. Now it was Marcus's turn to go pale. He opened his mouth to speak. No words came out. Nathan turned to face Dr. Graham Whitfield. The physician had backed away several steps, his face the color of old paper sweat streaming down his forehead, despite the cool morning air. His hands were shaking so badly that the stethoscope in his pocket was visibly trembling. Dr. Whitfield, Nathan said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. I heard you too. I heard you say you were scared. I heard Marcus tell you to do as he said, or lose everything. I heard you agree to sign the death certificate and declare she died of heart failure. Graham Whitfield made a sound. It was not a word. It was something between a gasp and a moan, the sound of a man watching his entire life crumble around him. You used tetrodotoxin, Nathan continued, a compound that slows the heartbeat to almost nothing, a compound that lowers body temperature and makes the muscles go rigid, a compound that makes a living person look exactly like a corpse. The crowd erupted into chaos. Screams, gasps, prayers, the clicking of camera phones capturing every moment. How do you know that? Someone shouted. How do you know what drug it was? Nathan's eyes never left Graham Whitfield's face. Because you said it. Last night into the car, you said the word out loud. You said tetrodotoxin and you talked about the antidote neostigmine in case anything went wrong. He reached into the pocket of his worn blue uniform. Every eye in the crowd tracked the movement. He pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. I served in the Army, Nathan said. 20 years ago, I was a medic in the Gulf. I know people. I know pharmacists who remember what I did for them in the desert. When I heard what you were planning, I made a phone call. I drove 3 hours round trip last night while you were sleeping peacefully in your mansions. He held up the vial so everyone could see it. This is the antidote. This can bring her back, but only if we act now, only if we act before it's too late. Marcus lunged forward. You can't. You have no right. She's my wife. Nathan met his eyes without flinching. If she's dead, then this will do nothing. It's just a harmless liquid. It won't hurt a corpse. It won't change anything. He paused, letting the words sink in. But if she's alive, if what I heard last night is true, then this will save her, and you will go to prison for the rest of your miserable life. The crowd held its breath. Marcus's face twisted with rage and fear. His hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, it looked like he might attack Nathan right there in front of everyone. Then a voice rang out from the front row. Let him try. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was a woman in her early 70s with silver hair, styled elegantly, and eyes that blazed with fierce determination. She wore a black dress and a string of pearls, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had never in her life backed down from a fight. Margaret Ashworth, Victoria's aunt, Victoria's only living relative, the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12 years old. Margaret stepped forward, moving through the crowd like a ship cutting through waves. People parted before her. They had no choice. There was something in her eyes that commanded obedience. She stopped directly in front of Marcus. If Victoria is truly dead, Margaret said, her voice cold as steel, then this man's medicine will do nothing. We will bury her as planned, and we will grieve as we should. She paused. But if there is even the smallest chance that she is alive, if there is even one breath left in her body, then we will not put her in the ground. We will not pour concrete over my niece while her heart is still beating. Marcus's face contorted. Margaret, please, you can't possibly believe. I believe, Margaret interrupted, that Victoria was healthy 3 days ago. I believe she was planning a trip to visit me next week. I believe she had no history of heart disease and showed no signs of illness. Her eyes narrowed. And I believe that you have never loved her, not for one single day of your marriage. I have watched you for 12 years, Marcus. I have seen the way you look at her when you think no one is watching. The resentment, the jealousy, the greed. The crowd was utterly silent now. Even the wind had stopped. Let this man try, Margaret said. Let him give Victoria the antidote. If it does nothing, we will proceed with the burial, and I will personally apologize for the interruption. She stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that only he could hear her next words. But if it works, if Victoria opens her eyes, then God help you, because I will not. The cemetery workers stepped back from the casket. The guards who had been trying to restrain Nathan released their grip and moved away. The crowd pressed forward, hundreds of faces straining to see what would happen next. Nathan approached the casket slowly, reverently, as if he were approaching a sacred altar. His hands were steady now. Whatever fear or doubt he had felt was gone, replaced by a calm certainty that seemed to radiate from him like light. He looked down at Victoria Blackwell. She lay perfectly still, her face peaceful, her skin the color of candle wax. Her hands were folded across her chest. Her eyes were closed. A small cotton plug had been placed in each nostril, a common practice for preparing bodies for burial. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman who had died peacefully in her sleep. But Nathan knew better. He had seen death in the desert. He had held dying men in his arms and watched the light fade from their eyes. He knew what death looked like, and this was not it. There was something about Victoria's face, something about the way her chest neither rose nor fell that seemed wrong. Too perfect, too still, like a photograph rather than a corpse. I need help, Nathan said quietly. Someone needs to hold her head up. Someone needs to open her mouth. For a moment, no one moved. Then Margaret Ashworth stepped forward. Tell me what to do, she said. Nathan placed his folded jacket beneath Victoria's neck, tilting her head back slightly to open her airway. Margaret, her hands trembling, but steady, reached down and gently parted Victoria's lips. The crowd leaned forward as one. Phones recorded from every angle. Somewhere in the distance, a siren began to wail. Someone had called the police, or an ambulance, or both. It didn't matter now. All that mattered was the small glass vial in Nathan's hand. He unscrewed the cap. He drew the clear liquid into the glass dropper. He positioned the dropper directly above Victoria's mouth. Come back, he whispered so quietly that only Margaret could hear him. Come back to us, Mrs. Blackwell. It's not your time yet. He squeezed the dropper. One drop fell. The world held its breath. 1 second passed, nothing. 2 seconds, nothing. 3 seconds. Nathan's hand began to tremble. The certainty that had filled him moments ago was wavering. What if he was wrong? What if they had given her too much of the poison? What if it was already too late? 4 seconds. The crowd began to murmur. Doubt crept into their voices. Maybe the man really was insane. Maybe grief had broken his mind. Maybe this was all just a terrible, embarrassing mistake. 5 seconds. Marcus Blackwell's face began to relax. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was over. The old fool had failed. Victoria was dead, and she was going to stay dead, and everything Marcus had planned was going to 6 seconds. A sound, faint, almost imperceptible. It came from the casket. It came from Victoria. A tiny flutter of breath, a whisper of air passing through lips that had been closed for more than 30 hours. Nathan's eyes widened. Again, I need to give her another drop. Do it, Margaret cried. Do it now. Marcus surged forward. No, you can't. This is murder. But the crowd blocked his path. A wall of mourners stepped between Marcus and the casket, their faces no longer grief-stricken, but angry, suspicious, accusing. Let him try, someone growled. Get back, another voice commanded. If she's alive and you stopped this, you'll answer to all of us. Nathan squeezed the dropper again. A second drop fell onto Victoria's tongue. And this time there was no waiting. Victoria's chest rose, her lungs filled with air for the first time in more than a day. Her body convulsed, her hands clenched. Her eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings struggling to open. And then she coughed. A small cough, at first weak and wet, but it was followed by another. And another, each one stronger than the last, each one more alive. The crowd erupted, screams of shock and joy and disbelief mixed together into a single overwhelming roar. Women fell to their knees in prayer. Men shouted hallelujahs to the sky. Cameras captured every second, every frame, every moment of what could only be called a miracle. Margaret grabbed Victoria's hand and held it tight. Victoria, Victoria, can you hear me? You're safe now. You're alive. Victoria's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, wandering blindly across the white silk canopy above her. But slowly, gradually, they began to clear. They found Margaret's face. They found the crowd pressing around her. They found the strange bearded man who stood beside her casket with a small glass vial in his hand. And then they found Marcus, her husband, the man who had shared her bed for 12 years, the man who had kissed her goodbye 3 days ago before she collapsed at dinner, the man who had tried to bury her alive. Victoria's lips moved. Her voice was weak, cracked, barely audible. But in the sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd, everyone heard her words. Why? She looked at Marcus with eyes that held no anger. Not yet, just confusion, just betrayal, just the devastating realization that the man she had trusted with her life had tried to take it from her. Marcus. Why? Marcus Blackwell stood frozen. His face had gone through a dozen transformations in the past 60 seconds. Shock, denial, rage, fear, and now something else entirely, something that looked almost like madness. His hand moved to his jacket pocket. The movement was quick, instinctive, the kind of motion that comes from having a plan and watching it fall apart. Nathan saw it. His military training kicked in before his conscious mind even registered what was happening. He threw himself forward, his hand closing around Marcus's wrist, just as Marcus pulled a syringe from his pocket. The needle gleamed in the morning sunlight. The syringe was filled with murky liquid. More poison, a backup plan. If Victoria somehow survived, Marcus had intended to finish the job right here at her own funeral in front of hundreds of witnesses. He had counted on the confusion, the chaos, the distraction. One quick injection, and it would all be over. But Nathan held his wrist in a grip like iron. Drop it, Nathan said, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus struggled, his face contorted with desperate fury. Let go of me. You don't understand. She was supposed to be mine. Everything was supposed to be mine. The security guards finally found their purpose. They rushed forward and grabbed Marcus from behind, wrenching his arms back, forcing him to release the syringe. It fell to the grass, the needle sinking into the soft earth. You can't do this, Marcus screamed. I'm her husband. I have rights. She belongs to me. She belongs to no one, Margaret said coldly, least of all you. Victoria was sitting up now, supported by Nathan on one side and her aunt on the other. Her face was pale, her body weak, but her eyes were sharp, clear, alive. She looked at the syringe lying in the grass. She looked at Marcus struggling against the guards who held him. She looked at the crowd of witnesses, their phones still recording their faces frozen in expressions of shock and outrage. And then she looked at Nathan Mercer, this stranger in a worn blue uniform who had appeared from nowhere to save her life. Who are you? She whispered. Nathan met her eyes. In them, she saw something unexpected. Not triumph, not pride, just a deep, profound sadness. The sadness of a man who had lost everything and found in this single act of courage a reason to keep living. Just a man, he said quietly, just someone who couldn't stand by and watch someone else get buried before their time. Police cars were pulling up to the cemetery now, their lights flashing red and blue against the white funeral canopy. EMTs rushed toward the casket with stretchers and equipment. Reporters pushed through the crowd, shouting questions that no one could answer. But for one long moment, Victoria Blackwell and Nathan Mercer simply looked at each other. Two strangers, two survivors, two people whose lives had just become intertwined in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. Thank you, Victoria said. Her voice was still weak. Her body was still trembling. But her hand found his and squeezed it with surprising strength. You saved my life. Nathan shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. You just needed someone to give you a chance. You did the rest yourself. The EMTs lifted Victoria onto a stretcher, wrapping her in warm blankets, checking her vital signs with urgent efficiency. Margaret walked beside her, holding her hand, refusing to let go. And Nathan stood alone at the edge of the platform, where the casket had rested moments ago. The crowd parted around him. People stared at him with wonder, with gratitude, with something that looked almost like reverence. But Nathan barely noticed. He was watching Marcus Blackwell being led away in handcuffs, screaming threats and denials that no one believed anymore. He was watching Dr. Graham Whitfield being escorted to a second police car, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. He was watching the casket that had almost become a prison, still draped in white flowers, still surrounded by the trappings of a funeral that would never be completed. And he was thinking about his own past, about the wife who had left him, about the daughter who had never been his, about all the years he had spent wondering why he was still alive when everyone he loved had disappeared. Maybe this was why. Maybe this single moment, this single act of impossible courage was the reason he had survived all those nights of wanting to give up. Maybe he had been saved so that he could save someone else. The morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling golden light across the cemetery hillside. And for the first time in 7 years, Nathan Mercer allowed himself to hope. 3 days passed. 3 days of fluorescent lights in hospital beds and doctors who spoke in hushed voices outside Victoria's door. 3 days of IV drips and blood tests and specialists who flew in from Boston and New York to examine the woman who had come back from the dead. The story had spread across the nation like wildfire. Every news channel carried the footage. The funeral, the stranger in the blue uniform, the scream that had stopped a burial. The moment Victoria Blackwell opened her eyes in her own casket, they called it a miracle. They called it impossible. They called it the most shocking thing anyone had ever witnessed at a cemetery. But Victoria Blackwell did not care about any of that. She cared about answers. She lay in her private room at Jefferson University Hospital, surrounded by flowers that well-wishers had sent from across the country. Get well cards covered every surface. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages she did not have the strength to read. But her mind was clear now. The poison had left her system. Her heartbeat had returned to normal. Her body temperature had stabilized. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. They said another few hours in that casket, and she would have been buried with a heartbeat so faint that no one would have ever known. Lucky. That was what they called it. Victoria called it something else entirely. She called it betrayal. Aunt Margaret sat beside her bed, holding her hand the way she had when Victoria was 12 years old and her parents had just died. "Tell me everything," Victoria said. Her voice was still weak, but there was steel beneath it. The steel that had built an empire. The steel that had survived every obstacle life had thrown at her. Margaret's face was drawn with exhaustion. She had not slept in 3 days. She had not left Victoria's side for more than an hour at a time. "The police have Marcus in custody," Margaret said, "and the doctor, Graham Whitfield. They've both been charged with attempted murder." Attempted murder. Victoria let the words roll across her tongue. They tasted bitter. Wrong. "He tried to bury me alive, Margaret. My own husband." "I know, sweetheart." 12 years. Victoria's eyes stared at the ceiling, seeing nothing, seeing everything. 12 years I shared my bed with that man. 12 years I trusted him with my home, my company, my life. Her hands clenched the hospital blankets. How did I not see it? How did I not know? Margaret squeezed her hand tighter. "Because you loved him. Because you wanted to believe the best in him. That's not a weakness, Victoria. That's who you are. It almost got me killed." "But it didn't." Margaret's voice hardened. "You're alive. You're here, and now we make sure he pays for what he did." Victoria turned her head to look at her aunt. "I want to know everything. Everything he did. Everything he planned. I want to understand exactly how close I came to dying in that box." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then you need to talk to the man who saved you." Nathan Mercer arrived at the hospital that evening. He looked different than he had at the cemetery. His beard had been trimmed, his hair had been cut. Someone had given him clean clothes, a simple button-down shirt and khaki pants that hung slightly loose on his thin frame. But his eyes were the same, those burning, haunted eyes that had stared down Marcus Blackwell without flinching. Those eyes that held secrets Victoria could not begin to imagine. He stood in the doorway of her hospital room, hesitant to enter. like a man who did not believe he belonged in a place this clean, this bright, this full of expensive flowers and get well wishes. "Come in," Victoria said. Nathan stepped inside. He moved carefully as if afraid of breaking something. He stopped a few feet from her bed and stood with his hands clasped in front of him. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, "I'm glad you're recovering. You saved my life. I just did what needed to be done." Victoria studied him, this strange, weathered man who had appeared from nowhere and pulled her back from the grave. Who was he? What had driven him to risk everything for a woman he had never met? "Sit down," she said. "Please, I have questions." Nathan hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. He sat on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. "Tell me," Victoria said. "Tell me everything you heard that night." Nathan's voice was quiet as he spoke. He told her about his job at Oakmont Cemetery, the night shifts walking the grounds, checking the gates, making sure the dead rested in peace. He told her about the black Mercedes that had pulled into the back parking lot around 11 o'clock that night. "I thought it was strange," he said. "Nobody comes to a cemetery that late unless they're up to something. So I stayed in the shadows. I watched." Victoria listened without interrupting. "Your husband got out of the car, then the doctor. They stood by the trunk talking. I couldn't hear everything at first, but then they started arguing. Their voices got louder." Nathan's jaw tightened at the memory. "Your husband said the drug worked. He said you were cold. He said they needed to bury you early before anyone could ask questions, before anyone could request a second opinion or an autopsy." Victoria felt her stomach turn. Even now, even knowing the truth, hearing the details made her want to vomit. "The doctor was scared," Nathan continued. "I could hear it in his voice. He kept saying it was too risky, that someone might notice. But your husband, he threatened him. He said if the doctor didn't sign the death certificate and declare heart failure, he would lose everything, his practice, his clinic, his reputation." And Graham agreed. "Yes, ma'am," he agreed. Victoria closed her eyes. Graham Whitfield, the man who had treated her for 15 years, the man she had helped save from bankruptcy, the man who had looked into her eyes 1,000 times and promised to protect her health. He had signed her death certificate while she was still breathing. "How did you know about the antidote?" she asked. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "The doctor mentioned it. He was worried about what would happen if something went wrong, if you woke up before the burial. Your husband said it didn't matter, that by the time anyone suspected anything, you'd be under 6 feet of concrete." He paused. "But the doctor mentioned the drug by name, tetrodotoxin, and he mentioned what could reverse it, neostigmine." Victoria opened her eyes. "And you remembered?" "I was a medic in the Gulf War, ma'am, 20 years ago. I've seen things that stay with you, whether you want them to or not. When I heard those words, I knew exactly what they meant." "But how did you get the antidote so quickly?" Nathan's eyes dropped to the floor. "I made some calls. There's a pharmacist in Newark who served with me. He owed me his life from something that happened in the desert. I drove 3 hours each way that night, and he gave me what I needed." Victoria stared at this man. This stranger who had driven 6 hours through the night, risked everything he had, and stood alone against her husband and her doctor because he could not watch an innocent woman die. "Why?" she asked. "You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain. Why did you do it?" Nathan did not answer right away. His hands clasped and unclasped in his lap. His jaw worked silently. And then finally he spoke. "7 years ago," Nathan said, "I had a different life." Victoria waited. "I was a software engineer, a good one. I had a wife named Emma and a daughter named Lily. We had a little house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Every morning, Lily would draw pictures and I would put them on the refrigerator. Butterflies, our house, the three of us holding hands." His voice cracked. "Then the company I worked for went bankrupt. Overnight, everything changed. I lost my job. I sent out hundreds of resumes, but nobody wanted a 40-year-old engineer in a dying industry. Our savings ran out. The bills piled up. Emma started working double shifts at a cafe just to keep the lights on." Victoria felt her heart constrict. She had built a company. She had employed thousands of people. She had never truly understood what it meant to lose everything. "The fight started," Nathan continued. "Every night it seemed like. screaming matches that went on for hours. Emma said I wasn't trying hard enough. I said she didn't understand. And the whole time Lily sat on the stairs with her teddy bear crying. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I couldn't stop. I was drowning. I couldn't save myself, let alone her. He fell silent for a long moment. One night I came home from another failed interview. The house was empty. No Emma, no Lily, just a note on the kitchen table. Victoria held her breath. The note said she was tired. She said she couldn't do it anymore. And then Nathan's voice dropped to barely a whisper. And then she told me that Lily wasn't my daughter. She had been having an affair the whole time. Lily was never mine. The hospital room was utterly silent. I read that note 20 times, maybe 30. Then I collapsed on the floor and I screamed until my throat bled. The child I had rocked to sleep every night, the child who called me daddy, the child I would have died for, she was never mine. Tears were streaming down his weathered cheeks now. I lost the house. The bank took it. I slept in my car until they towed that too. Then I slept in parks, under bridges, in alleys behind restaurants where I could find scraps of food in the dumpsters. Victoria felt tears on her own face. She did not wipe them away. There were nights, Nathan said, when I stood on bridges, looking down at the water, thinking about how easy it would be. One step, just one step, and the pain would stop forever. But you didn't. No, I don't know why. Maybe I was too much of a coward. Or maybe some part of me still believed there was a reason to keep going. He looked up at Victoria, and in his eyes she saw something she recognized. Something that lived deep in her own soul. Survival. 6 months ago, I got the job at the cemetery. The manager didn't care about my past. He just needed someone to walk the grounds at night and make sure nobody vandalized the graves. They gave me a small room in the storage building, a hot plate. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over my head for the first time in years. Victoria nodded slowly. And then I heard them, your husband and your doctor planning to bury you alive. And I thought about all the times I couldn't save anyone, my marriage, my daughter, myself. I had failed everyone who ever mattered to me. His voice hardened, but not this time. This time I was going to do something, even if they called me crazy, even if they threw me in jail. I was not going to let another person die because I was too afraid to act. Victoria reached out and took his hand. It was rough and callous, the hand of a man who had known hard labor and harder times. But it was warm and strong and alive. You saved me, she said. You gave me my life back. And I swear to you, Nathan Mercer, I will never forget what you did. But Victoria refused to be a passive victim waiting for answers. 3 days after leaving the hospital, she hired a private investigator named Frank Holloway, a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes. She gave him access to her personal accounts and asked him to trace every transaction Marcus had made in the past 2 years. She also contacted her own lawyers and demanded copies of every document Marcus had ever signed on behalf of the company. Victoria sat in her study for hours each day, poring over bank statements and email records with the same intensity she had once devoted to building her business empire. She cross-referenced dates. She followed money trails. She built a timeline of her husband's betrayal with meticulous precision. The results confirmed her worst fears. Marcus had been planning her death for far longer than anyone suspected. Within 2 weeks, the full scope of Marcus Blackwell's conspiracy had been uncovered. It had started 18 months before the poisoning. Marcus had hired a lawyer in Delaware to create a forged version of Victoria's will, one that left everything to him instead of the charitable foundation she had established years ago. He had slowly transferred small amounts of money from joint accounts to offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. He had even purchased a house in Costa Rica under a false name, a place to disappear to once the inheritance was secure. Victoria sat in her study at home, surrounded by boxes of documents the police had recovered and the files her own investigator had compiled. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, email records, text messages between Marcus and Graham Whitfield discussing the poison, the dosage, the timing of her death. Her husband had spent 18 months planning her murder, and she had suspected nothing. Mrs. Blackwell. Victoria looked up. Derek Sullivan stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. Derek had been her driver for 8 years. A quiet man, loyal and reliable, who had never once given her reason to doubt him. "Derek, come in." He stepped inside, his face troubled. "The detectives asked me to come by. They said you wanted to hear what I saw that night." Victoria nodded. "I need to know everything." Derek sat across from her, his hands twisting his hat nervously. "The night you collapsed, ma'am, I was the one who drove you to the hospital. You were breathing hard, very weak, but you were alive. I could see your chest moving. I could hear you trying to speak." Victoria leaned forward. "When we got to the hospital, Dr. Whitfield met us at the emergency entrance. He took over right away, had them wheel you inside. I asked if I could stay. I wanted to make sure you were okay." His voice dropped. "But the doctor told me to leave. He said it was a private matter, that the family would handle things from here. I didn't want to go, Mrs. Blackwell. Something felt wrong, but he insisted." Victoria's jaw tightened. "2 hours later," Derek continued, "he came out and told us you had passed. Heart failure, he said. It happened too fast to save you." He looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "I knew something wasn't right. You were weak, but you weren't dying. Not like that. Not that fast. But I didn't say anything. I was just the driver. Who was going to believe me?" Victoria stood and walked around the desk. She placed her hand on Derek's shoulder. "You're not just the driver, Derek. You're one of the few people who saw the truth that night. And because you came forward, we have one more piece of evidence against them." Derek nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I didn't do more." "You did enough. You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask." The trial began 6 weeks later. The Philadelphia County Courthouse had not seen crowds like this in decades. Reporters from every major network jammed the steps outside. Spectators lined up hours before dawn, hoping to get a seat in the gallery. The story of the billionaire who came back from the dead had captured the imagination of the entire nation. Victoria arrived in a simple black dress. She walked up the courthouse steps with her head held high, flanked by Aunt Margaret and Nathan Mercer. Camera flashes exploded around her like lightning. Reporters shouted questions that she did not answer. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled. People stood against the walls. The air was thick with anticipation. And there at the defendant's table sat Marcus Blackwell and Dr. Graham Whitfield. Marcus looked nothing like the polished, sophisticated man Victoria had married 12 years ago. His face was gaunt. His hair was unkempt. His expensive suit hung on his frame like clothes on a scarecrow. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, full of resentment. Graham Whitfield sat beside him, smaller and more broken. His hands trembled constantly. His eyes were red from crying. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate. Prosecutor Catherine Resius rose to address the jury. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, known throughout Pennsylvania for her relentless pursuit of justice. She had personally requested this case. She had worked 18-hour days to prepare for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this is not just a case about greed. This is not just a case about betrayal. This is a case about a man who looked at his wife, the woman who had given him everything, and decided that she would be worth more to him dead than alive." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The evidence will show that Marcus Blackwell conspired with Dr. Graham Whitfield to poison Victoria Blackwell with a compound called tetrodotoxin, a compound that slows the heartbeat, that lowers body temperature, that makes a living person appear to be dead." The jury listened in horrified silence. "The evidence will show that Dr. Whitfield, a physician sworn to protect life, signed a fraudulent death certificate declaring that Victoria Blackwell had died of natural causes, that he helped prepare her body for burial, that he stood by and watched as she was placed in a casket knowing that her heart was still beating." Prosecutor Reyes turned to point at Marcus. "The evidence will show that Marcus Blackwell planned this murder for 18 months, that he forged his wife's will, that he transferred her money to secret accounts, that he bought a house in a foreign country where he planned to flee after she was buried." She walked slowly toward the jury box. "And the evidence will show that if not for the courage of one man, a man who risked everything to tell the truth, Victoria Blackwell would have been buried alive. She would have woken up in a coffin surrounded by darkness with 6 feet of earth and concrete above her. She would have died alone in terror while her husband celebrated his inheritance." The courtroom was utterly silent. This is attempted murder in its most calculated, most cold-blooded form, and we will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that these two men are guilty. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Medical experts explained the effects of tetrodotoxin. Financial analysts traced the money Marcus had hidden. Phone records showed hundreds of calls between Marcus and Graham in the weeks leading up to the poisoning. Frank Holloway, Victoria's private investigator, presented his findings. The forged will, the offshore accounts, the property in Costa Rica. Every piece of evidence that Victoria herself had helped uncover. Derek Sullivan testified about the night Victoria collapsed, about being sent away from the hospital, about the speed with which her death was declared. Nathan Mercer testified about what he heard in the parking lot, about the conversation between Marcus and Graham, about his desperate drive to Newark to find the antidote. And then on the final day of testimony, Victoria Blackwell took the stand. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as she walked to the witness chair. Every eye was fixed on her. The woman who had come back from the dead, the woman who had survived her own funeral. Prosecutor Reyes approached her gently. "Mrs. Blackwell, can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Marcus Blackwell?" Victoria's voice was steady. "I met Marcus 14 years ago at a charity event. He was charming, attentive. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We married 2 years later." "And how would you describe your marriage?" Victoria paused. "I thought it was happy. I thought we were partners. I gave him responsibilities at my company. I trusted him with access to my finances. I believed he loved me." "And when did you first realize something was wrong?" Victoria looked directly at Marcus. He did not look away. "When I opened my eyes in my own casket," she said. "When I saw his face above me, not crying with joy that I was alive, but frozen with rage that I hadn't died." The jury shifted uncomfortably. "And can you describe what you saw in that moment?" Victoria's voice hardened. "I saw a stranger. I saw a man I had never truly known. I saw greed and hatred in the eyes of someone I had loved for 12 years. Prosecutor Reyes nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell. No further questions." The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. He was a slick man in an expensive suit hired by Marcus with money he had stolen from Victoria's accounts. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said smoothly, "isn't it true that you were experiencing health problems in the weeks before your collapse?" "I had been tired, stressed from work. Nothing unusual." "And isn't it possible that Dr. Whitfield made an honest mistake, that he genuinely believed you had died?" Victoria's eyes flashed. "Dr. Whitfield had been my physician for 15 years. He knew my health better than anyone, and the toxicology report proves that I was poisoned. There was no mistake." The defense attorney pressed on. "But you have no direct evidence that my client administered the poison. No witnesses saw him—" "I don't need witnesses," Victoria interrupted. "I heard him threaten Dr. Whitfield in this very courthouse. I saw him pull a syringe from his pocket at my funeral trying to finish what he started." The evidence speaks for itself. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The defense attorney had no response. The moment came on the final day. Prosecutor Reyes had finished her closing argument. The defense had made its final desperate plea. The judge was about to send the jury to deliberate, and then Marcus Blackwell stood up. "I want to speak," he said. His attorney grabbed his arm. "Marcus, don't." "I said I want to speak," the judge frowned. "Mr. Blackwell, this is highly irregular." "I don't care." Marcus's voice was rising now, cracking with something that sounded like madness. "I've sat here for 2 weeks listening to everyone talk about what a monster I am. I deserve to tell my side." The judge hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You may address the court, but be careful what you say." Marcus turned to face Victoria. His face was twisted. His eyes were wild. The mask of the charming, sophisticated husband had shattered completely, revealing the creature that had always lurked beneath. "You want to know why?" he said. "You want to know why I did it?" Victoria met his gaze without flinching. "Because I was invisible," Marcus screamed. "For 12 years I was nothing but a shadow in my own house, Victoria Blackwell's husband. That's all I was. That's all anyone ever saw." The courtroom gasped. "You had your empire, your billions, your precious company that your father left you. And what did I have? Nothing. I was a decoration, a prop for your photo opportunities." His voice rose to a shriek. I gave you 12 years of my life, and you gave me nothing in return. No respect, no power, no seat at the table. Just a pat on the head and a credit card like I was some kind of pet. Victoria's face remained stone. So, yes, I planned it. I planned every detail. And you know what? I don't regret it. Not for 1 second. If you had to die for me to finally live like a man, then so be it. The courtroom erupted. Screams, gasps, the pounding of the judge's gavel. Order, order in the court. But Marcus was not finished. She was supposed to be mine, he howled, as the bailiffs rushed forward to restrain him. Everything was supposed to be mine. I earned it. I deserved it. She owed me. They dragged him back to the defendant's table, still screaming, still raging, still spewing the hatred that had festered inside him for 12 years. Victoria did not look away. She watched every moment, every spasm of rage, every flash of madness. And when it was over, when Marcus was finally silent and the courtroom had settled into shocked stillness, she spoke. You were right about one thing, Marcus. He looked up at her, his chest heaving. I did love my company. I loved what my father built. I loved the people who depended on me. I loved the work more than anything else in my life. She paused. But I also loved you. I trusted you. I opened my heart to you in ways I had never opened it to anyone. Her voice cracked just slightly. And you repaid me by trying to bury me alive. The jury did not need long to deliberate. 2 hours later, they returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Marcus Blackwell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dr. Graham Whitfield received the same sentence, plus the permanent revocation of his medical license. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, Victoria stood in the gallery with Nathan and Margaret beside her. Marcus turned one last time to look at her. There was no remorse in his eyes, only hatred, only rage, only the bitter fury of a man who had gambled everything and lost. Victoria watched him disappear through the courthouse doors, and then finally she allowed herself to breathe. That night, Victoria sat alone in her study. The house was quiet. The servants had gone home. Margaret was sleeping in the guest room upstairs. Victoria held a glass of wine in her hand untouched. She stared out the window at the Philadelphia skyline glittering with a million lights against the darkness. She was alive. She had survived. But the woman who had been buried in that casket was gone forever. In her place stood someone new, someone harder, someone who understood for the first time in her life how fragile everything truly was. There was a soft knock at the door. Nathan stood in the doorway, hesitant as always. I saw the light on, he said. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Victoria smiled faintly. Come in, please. Nathan sat across from her, his posture still carrying that hesitant quality of a man unaccustomed to comfort. It's over, Victoria said. They're going to prison. Justice was served. Yes, ma'am. So why don't I feel better? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Because justice doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give back the years you trusted him. It doesn't heal the wound of knowing someone you loved wanted you dead. Victoria looked at him, this strange, broken, beautiful man who had pulled her from the grave. How do you do it? She asked. How do you keep going after everything you have lost? Nathan's eyes dropped to his hands. One day at a time, he said. One breath at a time. You find something worth living for, even if it's small. Even if it's just the sunrise or a cup of coffee or the sound of birds in the morning. He looked up at her. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find a moment that makes all the pain worth it. A moment where you know without any doubt that you were put on this earth for a reason. Victoria felt tears on her cheeks. The cemetery, she whispered. That was your moment. Yes, ma'am, that was my moment. They sat together in the darkness, two survivors, two wounded souls watching the city lights flicker against the night. And for the first time since she had opened her eyes in that casket, Victoria Blackwell felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The weeks after the trial passed like a slow awakening. Spring turned to summer. The cherry blossoms that had bloomed during Victoria's funeral gave way to green leaves and warm breezes. Philadelphia shed its gray winter coat and emerged into sunlight, and Victoria Blackwell emerged with it. She returned to work 3 weeks after the verdict. The headquarters of Meridian Tech Industries occupied a gleaming tower in Center City, 42 stories of glass and steel that caught the morning sun like a beacon. Victoria had not set foot inside since the night she collapsed at dinner with Marcus. The night he had slipped tetrodotoxin into her wine and watched her crumple to the floor. Now she stood in the lobby looking up at the atrium that soared above her. Employees stopped to stare. Some whispered. Some pointed. A few began to applaud, and the applause spread like ripples across water until the entire lobby was thundering with it. Victoria Blackwell had returned from the dead, and she had come to reclaim her kingdom. Nathan Mercer stood at the edge of the lobby watching. He wore new clothes now, a simple navy blazer over a white shirt, khaki pants, leather shoes that still felt strange on feet accustomed to worn work boots. Victoria had insisted on buying them for him. She had insisted on a lot of things. After the trial, she had offered him a room in her estate, not the servants' quarters, but a proper guest suite on the second floor with its own bathroom and a view of the gardens. Nathan had refused at first. He had said it was too much, that he did not deserve such generosity. Victoria had looked at him with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You saved my life," she had said. "The least I can do is give you a bed that doesn't smell like cemetery groundskeeping equipment." So Nathan had stayed. At first he kept to himself. He woke early and walked the grounds of the estate, marveling at the manicured lawns and sculpted hedges that seemed to belong to another world entirely. He took his meals in the kitchen with the household staff, uncomfortable with the idea of sitting at Victoria's formal dining table. But slowly, gradually, Victoria drew him out. She invited him to join her for coffee in the mornings. She asked his opinion on matters large and small. She listened when he spoke and remembered what he said. She treated him not like a charity case or a curiosity, but like a human being whose thoughts and feelings mattered. And Nathan began to remember who he used to be before Emma left, before Lily was taken from him, before the years of homelessness and despair had stripped away everything he thought he knew about himself. He had been smart once, capable, a man who solved problems and built things and believed in his own worth. Victoria saw that man. She saw him even when Nathan could not see himself, and she was determined to bring him back. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. Victoria had called it to address the company's future in the wake of the scandal. Marcus's arrest had sent shockwaves through the industry. Stock prices had plummeted. Investors were nervous. Competitors were circling like sharks who smelled blood in the water. The boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. 12 leather chairs surrounded a polished mahogany table. On the walls hung portraits of Victoria's father, the company's founder, watching over his legacy with stern, painted eyes. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by her executive team. Aunt Margaret sat to her right, a silent pillar of support, and Nathan, at Victoria's insistence, sat in a chair against the wall, observing but not participating. "I don't belong in that room," he had said that morning. "You belong wherever I say you belong," Victoria had replied. "I want you to see how this company works. I want you to understand what we're fighting for." So Nathan sat and watched as Victoria addressed her board of directors. She spoke with confidence and clarity, laying out her plans for rebuilding investor trust, restructuring the executive team, and launching new products that would remind the world why Meridian Tech had dominated the industry for 2 decades. The board members listened, nodded, asked questions. Everything was proceeding smoothly. And then the presentation system crashed. It happened without warning. One moment, Victoria's slides were displaying on the massive screen behind her. The next moment, the screen went black. Error messages flashed. The presentation software froze. The backup system failed to activate. Panic rippled through the room. "What's happening?" "Someone call it." "We have investors on video conference. They can see this." Victoria's chief technology officer, a nervous man named Phillips, rushed to the control panel. He jabbed at buttons and typed commands, his face growing redder by the second. "I don't understand," he stammered. "The system was tested this morning. Everything was working perfectly." The board members shifted uncomfortably. On the video screens mounted around the room, the faces of major investors watched the chaos unfold. This was exactly the kind of dysfunction that made people lose faith in a company. Victoria kept her composure, but Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders. This meeting was supposed to demonstrate that Meridian Tech was stable, competent, ready to move forward. Instead, it was demonstrating the opposite. Nathan stood up. He did not think about what he was doing. He did not ask permission. He simply walked to the control panel where Phillips was still fumbling with buttons, gently moved the man aside and began to type. The room fell silent. Everyone watched as this stranger in the navy blazer, this nobody who had no business being in a board meeting, worked at the keyboard with calm, focused precision. His fingers moved quickly. His eyes scanned the error codes that flickered across the diagnostic screen. Somewhere in the back of his mind, years of knowledge were waking up. Knowledge he had thought was lost forever. Knowledge that had once made him one of the best software engineers in his field. 30 seconds passed. A minute. 90 seconds. And then the presentation screen flickered back to life. Victoria's slides reappeared exactly where they had left off. The backup system activated. The video feed stabilized. Everything was working again. Nathan stepped back from the control panel. The room was utterly silent. And then Victoria began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. And one by one, the board members joined her until the entire room was applauding the man who had just saved the most important meeting of the year. Victoria stood and walked to Nathan's side. She placed her hand on his shoulder and turned to face the board. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice ringing with pride, "this is Nathan Mercer, the man who saved my life at Oakmont Cemetery. And from this day forward, he will serve as my special advisor. His counsel will guide this company, and his judgment will have my full support." The board members exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical, some looked curious, but none of them dared to argue. Victoria Blackwell had spoken, and in this company her word was law. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Nathan threw himself into his new role with an energy he had not felt in years. He spent long hours studying the company's systems, identifying weaknesses, proposing solutions. He sat in on meetings and offered insights that surprised even the most senior executives. The man who had been invisible for so long was finally being seen, and Victoria watched him flourish with a warmth in her heart that she did not fully understand. She found herself looking forward to their morning coffee sessions. She found herself seeking his opinion on matters that had nothing to do with business. She found herself noticing small things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which was more often now. The way his voice softened when he spoke about his past. The way he listened, really listened, when she talked about her fears and hopes and dreams. One evening as they sat together in her study watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Victoria realized the truth that had been growing quietly in her heart for weeks. She was falling in love with Nathan Mercer. The realization should have terrified her. After Marcus, she had assumed that part of her heart was closed forever. But Nathan had opened it again through simple kindness and quiet strength, through being exactly who he was without pretense or manipulation. She wanted to tell him, she wanted to take his hand and confess everything. But fear held her tongue. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of ruining the friendship that had become so precious. So she kept her feelings locked away, hidden behind the same mask she had worn in 1,000 boardrooms. But secrets, she would learn, have a way of revealing themselves. The discovery came on a Thursday afternoon. Victoria was reviewing financial reports in her office when her assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Blackwell, there's something you need to see." The assistant's face was pale, troubled. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "What is it?" "The security team found something in the company's internal systems. Someone has been, well, you should see for yourself." Victoria followed her assistant to the security office on the 35th floor. The head of security, a stern woman named Rodriguez, was waiting with a laptop open on the desk. "We detected unusual activity in the financial databases," Rodriguez explained. "Someone has been accessing confidential files, copying them, sending them to an external server." Victoria's blood ran cold. "Corporate espionage. Worse." Rodriguez turned the laptop to face Victoria. "The activity traces back to a single workstation, your private secretary's computer." Victoria stared at the screen. Linda Morse. Linda had been Victoria's private secretary for 4 years. She was efficient, professional, always impeccably dressed. She knew Victoria's schedule better than Victoria herself. She had access to every aspect of Victoria's professional life, and apparently she had been betraying her all along. "There's more," Rodriguez said grimly. "We found communications between Ms. Morse and your ex-husband, dating back 18 months. The room spun. Victoria gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Marcus. Even from prison, he was still trying to destroy her. What kind of communications? Rodriguez pulled up the files. Emails, text messages, encrypted chat logs. Victoria read them with growing horror. Linda Morse had been Marcus's accomplice from the beginning. She had provided him with information about Victoria's health, her schedule, her medications. She had helped him plan the poisoning by telling him exactly when Victoria would be most vulnerable. And after Marcus's arrest, she had continued his work from the inside, slowly sabotaging Meridian Tech, leaking confidential data to competitors, undermining Victoria's efforts to rebuild. The woman Victoria had trusted with her calendar had been trying to destroy her company. Victoria found Linda in the executive break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She looked up when Victoria entered, her face arranging itself into a pleasant smile. "Mrs. Blackwell, I was just about to bring you your afternoon." "Save it." Linda's smile faltered. Victoria closed the door behind her. They were alone, just the two of them with nothing but the truth between them. "I know what you've been doing, Linda. I know about the files you copied, the data you leaked, the communications with Marcus." Linda's face went white. "I know everything." For a moment, Linda said nothing. She stood frozen, the coffee cup trembling in her hand. Then her expression changed. The pleasant professional mask fell away, revealing something cold and bitter underneath. "So you finally figured it out," Linda said. "Took you long enough." Victoria felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice steady. "Why, I gave you a good job, a good salary. I trusted you." Linda laughed. It was an ugly sound full of resentment. "You trusted me to fetch your coffee and manage your schedule. You trusted me to be invisible. Do you even know my last name, Mrs. Blackwell? Do you know anything about my life outside this office?" Victoria said nothing. "Of course you don't, because I was nothing to you, just another employee, just another piece of furniture in your perfect little empire." Linda set down the coffee cup with a sharp click. "Marcus understood me. He saw me. He promised me that when you were gone, everything would be different. I would have a real position, real power, real respect." Victoria shook her head slowly. "Marcus used you, the same way he used everyone, the same way he tried to use me. At least he noticed I existed." The words echoed in the empty break room. Linda's chest was heaving now, years of hidden resentment pouring out like water from a broken dam. "I spent 4 years watching you take everything for granted, your money, your company, your perfect life. You had everything and you didn't even appreciate it. You deserved what Marcus planned for you." Victoria stepped closer. "Maybe I wasn't the boss I should have been. Maybe I didn't see the people around me as clearly as I should have. But nothing justifies what you did. You helped a man try to bury me alive. You betrayed every principle of decency and humanity." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is your termination letter, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. Your access to all company systems has already been revoked." Linda snatched the letter, her face twisted with fury. "You think this is over? Marcus has friends, powerful friends. This company will survive because my father built it to last, because I have people around me now who I can trust, real people with real integrity who would never sell their souls for promises from a man like Marcus Blackwell." Victoria turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Linda. I hope someday you find whatever it is you're really looking for, but you won't find it by hurting others." She walked out without looking back. That night, Victoria sat alone in her study. The confrontation with Linda had drained her. She felt exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. How many more betrayals could one person endure? A soft knock came at the door. Nathan stood in the hallway, concern written across his face. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "Define okay." Nathan entered and sat across from her. He did not speak. He simply waited, giving her the space to share or not share as she chose. "I'm tired, Nathan," Victoria finally said. "Tired of being suspicious of everyone. Tired of wondering who else might be waiting to stab me in the back." "That's understandable. Is it because sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy, like I'll never be able to trust anyone again?" Nathan leaned forward. You trust your Aunt Margaret. She's family. You trust Derek, your driver. Victoria paused. Yes, I suppose I do. You trust me. The words hung in the air between them. Victoria looked at Nathan, really looked at him, and saw nothing but sincerity in his eyes. No hidden agenda, no secret resentment, just a man who had risked everything for a stranger and asked for nothing in return. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. Nathan smiled. It was a small smile, gentle and warm, and it made Victoria's heart ache with longing. Then you haven't lost everything, he said. You still know how to see the good in people. You just have to be more careful about who you let close. Victoria felt tears prickling at her eyes. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to confess everything she had been feeling. She wanted to take his hand and ask him if there was any chance, any possibility that he might feel the same way. But before she could speak, Nathan's face brightened with excitement. Actually, I'm glad you're here. There's something I've been wanting to tell you. Victoria's heart leaped. What is it? I've met someone. The world stopped. Her name is Caroline Hayes. She volunteers at the community center downtown. I met her a few weeks ago when I was helping with their computer systems. She's kind and gentle, and Nathan's eyes were glowing now, alive with a happiness Victoria had never seen in him before. She makes me want to smile again. Victoria felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces, but her face betrayed nothing. She had spent 52 years learning how to hide her emotions in boardrooms, in business meetings. She had mastered the art of the perfect mask. And now, in the most painful moment of her life, that mask saved her. That's wonderful, Nathan, she heard herself say. I'm so happy for you. I want you to meet her. I think you'd really like her. I'm sure I would. Nathan reached out and squeezed her hand. Thank you, Victoria, for everything, for believing in me when no one else would, for giving me a second chance. I couldn't have found this happiness without you. Victoria squeezed back, holding on for just a moment longer than she should have. You deserve happiness, Nathan. You deserve all the good things life has to offer. He stood still, smiling, and walked to the door. Good night, Victoria. Good night. The door closed behind him. And Victoria Blackwell, the woman who had survived her own funeral when he buried her face in her hands and wept. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Victoria's life, harder than the poisoning, harder than the trial, harder than learning that her husband had tried to murder her. Because this pain had no villain, no one to blame, no justice to pursue. Nathan was happy. He was in love. And Victoria had to watch it unfold while pretending that her heart wasn't breaking. She met Caroline Hayes at a dinner party at the estate. Caroline was everything Nathan had described. Kind, gentle, beautiful in an understated way, with warm brown eyes and a smile that could light up a room. Victoria wanted to hate her, but she couldn't. Caroline had done nothing wrong. She had simply fallen in love with a good man who deserved to be loved. And knowing that made it hurt even more. Victoria threw herself into work. She spent long hours at the office rebuilding the company that Linda Morse had tried to sabotage. She traveled to meetings in New York and Boston and San Francisco. She did everything she could to exhaust herself so completely that she would not have the energy to feel. But late at night, alone in her study, the feelings found her anyway. Nathan proposed to Caroline 3 months later. He shared the news with Victoria over breakfast, his face radiant with joy. She said yes, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I can't believe it. After everything I've lost, after all those years of thinking I would never be happy again. She said yes. Victoria smiled. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. I'm so glad, Nathan, you deserve this. I want you to come to the wedding. I want you to be there. Of course, I wouldn't miss it. Nathan hesitated. There's something else. Caroline and I, we don't have much money. We were planning something small, just a few friends at the courthouse. Victoria saw her opportunity, a chance to do something good, a chance to transform her pain into something beautiful. Let me sponsor the wedding, she said. Nathan's eyes widened. Victoria, I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Please, Nathan, let me do this for you. After everything you have done for me, it would be my honor. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for saving my life," she said. "Now go live yours." The wedding was held in the gardens of Victoria's estate. White roses covered every surface. Golden drapes billowed in the gentle summer breeze. 200 guests filled the rows of chairs that had been arranged beneath an archway of flowers. Victoria sat in the front row wearing a navy blue dress that matched her eyes. She watched as Nathan stood at the altar, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a charcoal gray suit with a white boutonniere. She watched as Caroline walked down the aisle radiant in an elegant white gown that Victoria had secretly paid for. She watched as they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. And when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Victoria applauded with the rest of the guests, her smile perfect, her eyes dry, her heart silently weeping. She had loved him. She would probably always love him. But sometimes love meant letting go. Sometimes it meant wanting someone's happiness more than your own. Sometimes it meant standing in the front row at their wedding and clapping until your hands hurt, because that was what they needed and their needs mattered more than your pain. This was her sacrifice. This was her gift. And no one would ever know what it cost her. 6 months passed. Victoria had learned to live with the ache in her heart. It was always there, a quiet presence in the background of her days, but it no longer consumed her. She had work to focus on, a company to run, a legacy to protect. She had stopped hoping for love. And then she met William Prescott. It happened at a charity gala in New York City. Victoria was there to present a donation to a children's hospital foundation. William was there because he sat on the foundation's board. He was 58 years old with silver hair and kind eyes, and a gentle manner that put everyone around him at ease. He was wealthy, though not as wealthy as Victoria. He had built his fortune in manufacturing, creating products that improved people's lives rather than simply making money. But what struck Victoria most was how he looked at her. Not at her money, not at her power, not at the woman who had come back from the dead. He looked at her like she was simply a person, a woman, someone worth knowing for who she was inside. They talked for 3 hours that night about business and philanthropy and the challenges of building something that mattered, about loss and recovery and the unexpected paths life sometimes took. When the gala ended, William asked if he could see her again. Victoria said yes. Their courtship was slow and careful. Neither of them was young anymore. Neither of them was naive about the complexities of love and trust. They had both been hurt before, and they were both determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. So they took their time. Dinners that lasted for hours, long walks through Philadelphia's historic streets, quiet evenings watching the sun set over the Schuylkill River. William never pushed. He never demanded. He simply showed up day after day, proving through his actions that he was exactly who he appeared to be. And gradually, Victoria's wounded heart began to open. She told him about Marcus, about the poisoning, about waking up in her own casket. She told him about Nathan, though she kept her feelings for him private. Some secrets were meant to stay buried. William listened to everything without judgment. When she finished, he took her hand and said the words she had been longing to hear. "I'm not Marcus. I'm not here for your money or your company. I'm here because when I'm with you, I feel like the best version of myself. And I would like to spend whatever time I have left in this world trying to make you feel the same way." Victoria looked into his eyes and saw nothing but truth. "Yes," she whispered, "I would like that too." William proposed on a spring evening 1 year after they met. They were in Victoria's garden, surrounded by the same roses that had decorated Nathan's wedding. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He got down on one knee, pulled a ring from his pocket, and asked her to marry him. Victoria said yes. She said it without hesitation, without fear, without the shadow of doubt that had haunted her for so long. She had learned something in the years since her resurrection. She had learned that love was not about perfection. It was not about finding someone who would never hurt you or disappoint you. It was about finding someone who was worth the risk. William Prescott was worth the risk, and Victoria Blackwell was ready to love again. The wedding was small and intimate, just family and close friends gathered in a chapel in the countryside. Nathan and Caroline came, of course. Nathan stood among the guests with his hand resting on Caroline's swollen belly. They were expecting their first child in 3 months. Victoria walked down the aisle on Aunt Margaret's arm, wearing a simple ivory dress that made her feel beautiful in a way she had not felt in years. William waited at the altar, his eyes shining with tears of joy. They exchanged vows. They exchanged rings. They kissed as husband and wife. And when Victoria looked out at the small gathering of people who had come to celebrate her happiness, she felt something she had thought was lost forever. Peace, not the absence of pain, not the erasure of all the terrible things that had happened to her, but a quiet, steady peace that came from knowing she had survived. She had endured. She had found her way back to hope. 1 year later, a golden summer evening at the Blackwell estate, two families gathered in the garden, surrounded by the fragrance of roses and the soft music of a string quartet playing in the distance. Nathan and Caroline sat on a blanket on the grass, their 6-month-old son, Daniel, sleeping peacefully in Caroline's arms. The boy had Nathan's eyes and Caroline's smile, and everyone who saw him agreed that he was the most beautiful baby in Philadelphia. Victoria and William sat nearby, taking turns holding their 3-month-old daughter, Sophia. She was a miracle baby, the doctors had said. At Victoria's age, pregnancy was rare and risky, but Sophia had arrived healthy and strong with a full head of dark hair and a cry that could shake the windows. Victoria had never known she wanted to be a mother until she held Sophia for the first time. Now she could not imagine her life without her. The sun was setting, the sky was turning amber and rose. The children were sleeping, the adults were talking softly, sharing stories and laughter. Nathan caught Victoria's eye across the blankets. There was no awkwardness between them now. No hidden longing, only the deep abiding affection of two people who had saved each other in ways that words could never fully express. Nathan raised his glass of wine. "I want to make a toast," he said. Everyone fell silent. 7 years ago, I lost everything. My home, my family, my reason to live. I spent years sleeping under bridges and wondering why I bothered to keep breathing. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. Then one night I heard two men planning to bury a woman alive, and something inside me woke up, something that had been dead for a long time. I realized that I had been saved for a reason, that all my suffering had led me to that moment, that cemetery, that chance to do something that mattered. He looked at Victoria. "You gave me my life back. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You helped me remember who I used to be and showed me who I could become." Tears were streaming down his weathered cheeks now. "So here's to second chances. Here's to the people who believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves. Here's to rising from the ashes." He raised his glass higher. "From ashes to dawn." Victoria lifted her own glass, her heart overflowing with gratitude and love and the profound joy of being alive. "From ashes to dawn," she repeated. The others joined in their voices, blending together in the evening air. "From ashes to dawn." As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Victoria Blackwell looked around at the people she loved. Her husband William steady and true, her daughter Sophia sleeping in her arms, her Aunt Margaret the rock who had never wavered, Nathan and Caroline and little Daniel proof that broken lives could be made whole again. She thought about everything she had been through. The betrayal, the poisoning, the casket, the funeral that almost became her grave. She thought about Marcus rotting in prison, consumed by the hatred that had destroyed him. She thought about Linda Morse and Graham Whitfield paying the price for their choices. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who had trusted too easily and been hurt beyond measure. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who had walked through the valley of death and emerged into the light. Victoria had learned the hardest lessons life could teach. That betrayal wore familiar faces and salvation came from strangers. That love rarely matched our expectations, and sometimes the greatest gift was letting go. Most importantly, she had learned that hope was not a feeling, it was a choice. A decision to believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that tomorrow could be better than today. William's hand found hers in the darkness. Sophia stirred and cooed in her sleep. The string quartet played a melody that seemed to float on the evening breeze. And Victoria Blackwell, the woman who had come back from the dead, closed her eyes and smiled. This was her life now, not perfect, not painless, but hers. And she would treasure every moment of it for as long as she lived, because she knew something that most people never learned. She knew how precious it was to breathe, how precious it was to love, how precious it was to watch the sun set and know that she would be alive to see it rise again. From ashes to dawn. Always and forever. From ashes to dawn.